Clair Obscur Expedition 33 moved me to such an extent that it got me to proclaim something which I previously would have never considered saying in my entire life. I forgive the French. Expedition 33 has been an atypical game within its own genre. It's a rare exception of a game with a certain mechanical style, feeling like it has massive production weight behind it while not being made in Japan. Even more rare, a game that does not elect to use any anime aesthetics, to the point where it kind of feels wrong to label it with the genre of Japanese role-playing game, even if it's what it's most closely aligned with. But in many ways, Expedition 33 has not only ushered itself in as a gateway title that a lot of people will claim as their origin points for loving JRPGs, but does so while still demonstrating the core appeals of why this style of games is so special. It is a game where characters are at the forefront of the story. It is a game where battles are both actively dynamic and thought-provoking. It is a game where immense customization options allows for vast player expression. It is a game where the soundtrack is so massive and diverse that it becomes exciting to hear the next song. It is a game that explores philosophical ideas of what it means to be human, and how to find that humanity during desperate times. It is a game where there's an enemy that has a big head, and they named him Big Head. After playing this game, I fell in love with RPGs all over again, which is weird, because I never fell out of love with this genre. But after Expedition 33, it made me crave experiencing all different kinds of games again. It just gets it right. And its success is going to inform design trends iterating on its ideas from all different kinds of studios. It might not be my personal game of the year like it is for a lot of other people, but it is a game that the industry and its fans needed to experience this year. In an age where games take even longer to make, cost even more money to make, and need to be safer investments than ever before, along came a game that to the untrained eye looks indistinguishable from an average AAA title, while spending a fraction of the budget, a fraction of the manpower, and that was willing to take a risk, being rewarded for it. I love RPGs a lot, but one thing I don't like so much about them is their length. There are certainly games in the genre I think justify being intensely long games, but these days it's almost become a selling point when I can see credits in the genre roll before 30 hours. Cosmic Star Heroine was on my radar for years solely because of this reason, that the game could not only be finished, but 100% completed in less than 20 hours. And last year, I played enough absurdly long games and lost my mind. I needed something simpler. I needed something smaller that I could pick apart and be done with in way less time. That being said, it doesn't matter if a game is short if it isn't good in the first place. But Cosmic Star Heroine comes in swinging. To be honest, I'm kicking myself for not getting into this game sooner. While not a genre favorite, it does a lot of really cool things that left me impressed, feeling like a nostalgic throwback to Super Nintendo RPGs such as Chrono Trigger, while being able to carve a visual and mechanical identity that is completely its own. Its battle system is remarkably efficient. The combat is built on the move disabling and hyper mode systems. After a character uses any of their abilities, they are disabled until taking a defend action. But at the same time, every turn that passes for a character builds up hyper points that makes their move while in hyper mode even stronger. There's a careful balance of needing to use your abilities at the right time, so your best options are available for hyper mode. The game expects you to not only decide what you're going to do now, but also 3 turns from now, and trust me when I say that's a rare thing for this genre. The game also has a very large cast of characters, honestly way bigger than I would have expected. Each of these characters can also be lightly customized by equipping them with different shields and items. This will allow them direct access to abilities and damage types they wouldn't normally have by default, allowing for a simple but vast strategic potential. But at the same time, there aren't that many factors and variables that it's overwhelming. There's an art and battle system design where you want just enough depth to make players thoughtful. Even just a few too many variables can cause mental fatigue, and Cosmic Star Heroine has one of the best balances of simplicity and complexity I've ever witnessed. On higher difficulties, this game pushes back a lot and demands complete understanding of character options, enemy movesets, and the turn order. If you fail a battle and get wiped, that's too bad, but have an instant retry button that puts you right back in. How kind. While this game has been around for a few years, it does feel like it's one of those gems that has flown somewhat under the radar. But trust me when I say that if you claim to love RPGs, this is one you'll definitely want to play. Recently, I discovered Colorgrave's catalog of games, and they caught my attention very easily. It's a studio that's carved out a niche for itself by making games that feel like they'd be right at home on the Game Boy Color. I had played through Prodigal and Veritas in 2024, so this time I had to catch up with Curse Crackers For Whom the Bell Toils. I gotta admit, I wasn't super hot on Curse Crackers at first. You know, it's a 2D platformer, I've played a lot of those types of games, and Curse Crackers wasn't really doing anything that was really convincing me of its quality. But trusting in the competence that was shown to me by playing other Colorgrave games, I kept pressing on. And you know what? It's fine. If you like playing games like Super Mario Bros. Or Donkey Kong Country, this game will probably be something you'll enjoy. There's a simple sense of fun in those games, bouncing on top of enemies, as well as interacting with the environment to progress. The level design is quite good, maybe nothing you haven't seen before, although I'll still give it props. It's functional and well made. Not every game has to be completely original. Although, yeah, I admit, this game isn't really that special. Absolutely a fun time for those wanting to try it out, but not much more. And then by accident, I did the Richter Belmont dash jump. After that happened, I stood there and thought to myself, oh my goodness, this changes everything. In the span of a second, Curse Crackers transformed into the Super Mario 64 of 2D platformers. Being able to dash forward, high jump, even bouncing off Chime. At this point, I'm not playing through the levels to progress in the game. Each new stage just became an opportunity to figure out how else I can move myself in this world. Curse Crackers has a miraculous sense of flow to it. The level design is laid out in a way that almost pushes you to keep moving. Belle's little animations after she performs an acrobatic maneuver add a performing flair to her moveset. It's a surprising bit of feedback that adds accomplishment for the player who did a neat little trick. This platformer has got the sauce. It legitimately has some of the best movement tech I've ever experienced with a game in this genre. It does so much with so little, not even requiring you to do more than simple running and jumping, but rewards you greatly for being creative with it. You need to do it to finish levels faster, complete challenges, and find secrets. The ones who are going to get the most out of this game as a completionist or speedrunner or anyone in between are the ones who just want to schmoove. Curse Crackers comes highly recommended. If you're a person who loves the feeling that acrobatic platformers can bring you, this should at the very least make it onto your wishlist as soon as possible. You remember those silly game reviews from the 2010s that went something along the lines of, "This game really makes you feel like the Batman"? Well, I say in earnest that this game really makes you feel like the Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong Banana is the Great Apes' first game in a hot frickin' minute. Despite this distance of time, Nintendo came in with a brand new look for the character, and a brand new direction for the overall game design. While my initial reactions of this interpretation of DK were very skeptical, Nintendo proved that they understand Donkey Kong, perhaps better than any of us. I mean, look at this guy. He's a big, tough gorilla with tree trunks for muscles. So what if the simple action of punching things was fun? He smashes through walls, he throws things, he climbs up trees, and really anything else for that matter. After all, Donkey Kong was gaming's original climbing boy. And when you look at this game, you go, wait a minute, yeah, this is DK. This is what a Donkey Kong game is supposed to be. DK's new look certainly is a big change, but this softer image does a lot to play into the goofier side of the gorilla. I mean, come on. Everything DK does in this series, every foe that he slammas, he does just to get the bananas. And Donkey Kong Banana is a game expressly built for that purpose. Getting bananas levels up DK through his skill tree, and after you reconcile, there's a skill tree in a Donkey Kong game? What parallel universe did I hop into? You'll then want to go out and find every banana in the game because you'll want DK to be bigger, faster, and stronger too. And that means DK will also just get to eat the bananas he loves so much. Ludonarrative harmony. While we are long out of the era of Rareware, this game feels like it still takes a lot of inspiration from DK's old crew. The Crocoids may not be the Kremlings, but they still feel like intentional nods to the old adversaries, while still being distinct creatures. A lot of the best levels in this game almost feel like they were ripped out of the Donkey Kong 64 2 that never was. Even the fractone characters throughout the game feel very rare coded. Even though the googly eyes on inanimate objects were always more of a Banjo-Kazooie thing, but whatever. Donkey Kong Banana is not just maybe the best game ever made in the Donkey Kong pantheon, but a true loving homage to this gaming icon's lineage. Because from start to finish, this is an absolutely jam-packed with fun adventure that you'll want to finish up before the bananas on your counter go ripe. Which is pretty fast, because the bananas go ripe after like 2 days. So, hurry up. There comes to be a time in our lives when we've done all we can. It doesn't mean we've reached the end, and there may be room for us to still explore. But whether by choice or by circumstance, we eventually need to pass the torch, to trust in the next generation to succeed us, and leave behind a legacy that is sure to guide their path. I was talking with someone I met last year about the kinds of games I like to play. I didn't know how much this person knew about video games, because I know from experience that to some people, the letters JRPG can mean something very different. I explained how I typically like adventure games that have some kind of emphasis on storytelling, to which I cited games like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, just to give examples. The person who I was in conversation with, apparently being a well-versed gamer type, questioned me on why I brought up Dragon Quest in this case. Because although her knowledge of the series was limited, she wasn't under the impression that they were particularly narrative-driven games. While I understood where she was coming from, this sentiment felt especially ironic. Mostly because this was coincidentally when I was playing through Dragon Quest V for the first time. While it could be debated how important each individual Dragon Quest game's story is, you can't acknowledge the game identity of Dragon Quest V without its story. This is a game where you begin with the protagonist's birth, jump a little bit forward in time to when he's a child, traveling alongside his concerned and doting father, insisting he heal you after every single battle. "Come on, Dad, I'll be fine, I can make it back to town." Eventually this protagonist grows up. He sees the worst and best this world has to offer. He makes friends with his enemies, finds genuine love, becomes a father, and before he realizes it, travels alongside his own children, now becoming the concerned and doting father healing them after every battle. Sorry kids, I didn't mean to look so distracted. I was just reminded of when I was your age. Dragon Quest V tells a generational story about the importance of family and legacy. Most of all, laying a path to success so that each generation can be better than the last. This game would have probably already been pretty cool if you started as an adult, then eventually had children, but the fact that you get to see what a successful father looks like firsthand gets you to appreciate being a father to your own children in the game. And this is important for the story of Dragon Quest V. Your protagonist for the game technically isn't meant to be the legendary hero. His duty is merely to find the legendary hero and give them the ultimate Zenithian sword so that they can save the world. And after playing Dragon Quest V, I almost had to wonder to myself, my goodness, where's the ambition in games anymore? Where can I find stories like this nowadays? Sure, storytelling has vastly evolved. The story of a Dragon Quest game is quaint even when measured against games contemporary to the same eras. But yet this simple story, which doesn't have a lot to say, spoke to me more than many complex and intricate dramas. From a battle system standpoint, Dragon Quest V probably isn't my favorite game in the series. Not from an adventuring standpoint, not even from a raw dramatic narrative standpoint. But on the premise of vibes, of getting me to feel an intended emotion, of providing me a life lesson which I will apply to the future of my existence. Holy crap. I think this is my favorite Dragon Quest game now. You know, considering that Mega Man was, at least for a time, my favorite video game franchise of all time, I've honestly played shockingly few of the games. Both Classic and Legends are the only two sub-series I've played more than one game in, and lately I've been wanting to address that. Mega Man X was the sub-series that was really calling me this time, and I had no shortage of options to choose from, but I pretty easily decided on X4. Not only for its pedigree of being considered one of the best games in the entire Mega Man franchise, but because gosh dang does this game look smooth. From an aesthetic angle, this is pretty much the quintessential Mega Man vibe. Even telling a story which, despite its dubious English localization, still feels earnest and impactful. This has always been one of my favorite games I've never played, so it felt good to finally commit to a full playthrough. Or rather, playthroughs in the case of X4. Now, if you were to query a fan of the Mega Man X games, they would probably tell you that X4 is possibly the easiest game in the sub-series. And while I don't disagree with that statement, you wouldn't think so if you watched me play the game. I would constantly die, get numerous game overs, feel outmatched against the bosses, and play Jet Stingray's level. You know, all the things that naturally frustrate players. To be honest, I wasn't really having a good time. And as I kept playing, my mind occasionally echoed thoughts along the lines of, really? This is the best game in the X series according to some people? But what's kind of interesting to consider with Mega Man is how the challenge of these games are constructed. Even as a fan of Mega Man, I can admit these games like to throw in some real bull honky from time to time. You're often punished for not having prior knowledge about the game, which feels really bad if you've picked the game up for the first time. And Mega Man X is arguably more egregious in this way than even the classic series, considering there are hidden collectibles which make the game borderline possible for anyone unskilled. It's even a challenge for me, and that's saying something. After all, I've been playing Mega Man games since before I ever kissed a girl. Which is technically still true, but don't worry about that. And I think this can make Mega Man a difficult series to get into from the context of a modern gamer. They aren't designed for the first-timer. They're made for platforming masters. And this is why I think Mega Man only seems to appeal to Mega Man fans. The fun of this series only fully reveals itself when you're armed with knowledge and you can apply that. About halfway through my Zero playthrough, I overwrote my progress of my X save file by accident. And I was bummed, although I begrudgingly restarted my X playthrough. But what took me a night's worth of attempts originally, I got back to in less than an hour. This time doing challenges Buster only. It felt excellent. When I played through the classic series around 5 years ago, I noticed this pattern as well. I would die and game over in each of the stages a discouraging number of times. But after about 20 minutes, you would almost think my next attempt made it seem like I'd been playing the game since I was a child. And really, that can be said about a lot of Capcom's core titles. Devil May Cry, Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, even the various fighting game franchises. A fair number of Capcom games demand a level of player skill that honestly isn't conveyed that well to someone coming to the experience green. So playing a Mega Man game where I didn't immediately know everything about it made me appreciate the reasoning for why some people just cannot seem to get into Mega Man. But it also made me realize what I love about Mega Man. Yeah, the challenge in these games is pretty dang high, but not insurmountable. And it's designed so fairly that you're going to learn to adapt real quick. And this is what the Mega Man series is all about in general. Being faced with tough challenges, but overcoming them and becoming stronger and better equipped to adapt to new situations. So honestly, just go play a Mega Man game. And even after you get your 15th game over, just remember that you are getting better. You will be able to see it through. Repose is a game where every action you take matters. In this mind-bending dungeon crawler, you're given only a few tools and set loose. This won't be a game for everyone, as its story might be a bit too abstract and unexplained for some people to get a meaningful narrative. But if just the look of this game is your vibe, then Repose is probably a game you'll want to check out. The dark monochrome color palette gives this game a style that is both retro and unique. It also sets up the environment as being hostile and unwelcoming. The overall color visor scheme can be changed based on player preference, but the limited view in both color variety and screen size make this adventure claustrophobic and uncomfortable. You only have a certain number of steps you can take before you need to rest up, because if the terrors don't kill you, exhaustion will. You even need to consider how to use your resources. There's almost a puzzle-like quality to traversing this game, because any needless deviations will probably result in you dying. That being said, I was kind of underwhelmed and thought the game didn't take its dungeon crawling far enough. With a handy map almost always on standby, I didn't feel lost. After walking down a few paths, I understood the layouts of the dungeons and how to progress. At a certain point, the game admittedly does become somewhat unpredictable. You don't really react to situations as much as you get affected by them and have to replan your route. And to be honest, it's kind of frustrating when one big mistake means death, rather than multiple small mistakes eventually informing your death. Fear doesn't feel so dreadful when the consequence is immediate. Even the game's main gimmick, the save code system, is also just kind of baffling. Instead of having a traditional save system, the game provides you an old-school style password at every reset. This is what you're supposed to enter when continuing your progress. And a few of the game's secrets even rely on discovering passcodes and entering them into the main menu to jump to a different part of the game. Although I have to wonder if this idea didn't get received so well in playtesting, because the game has an option by default which automatically remembers the last save code you discovered, rendering the entire intention almost entirely pointless. And even then, the secret content only relies on finding 2 codes, which are fairly easy to locate in the first place. Repose is not a massive time sink, and is without question the shortest game on this list, with a full completionist playthrough lasting only around 2 hours. But with the short amount of time it has, it is a surprisingly memorable game, although a project that massively builds upon its concepts might turn into a covert masterpiece one day. The original Crypt of the Necrodancer was a very difficult game for me to get into, but most of my grievances with it were due to the nature of it being a roguelike. I liked the soundtrack, I liked the art style, I liked the gameplay concept, just not the gameplay structure. When the team made Cadence of Hyrule, I found myself much more enamored with its rhythm-adventure mixture. Rift of the Necrodancer is an odd duck because there's no genre mixing going on. This is pretty much a straight rhythm game. It does have some correlation with Necrodancer in the way that enemies move on the track. It increases the difficulty of the songs by keeping you on your toes, and requires you to be engaged with the act of playing beyond pure reflex. Even if it's been a while since you last played the game, you really can't rely on muscle memory as much if you don't remember the unique functions of the monsters. I do have a few grievances with Rift though. The game has so many different monster types that come down the track, and it's difficult to memorize what they do and how they move around. The game isn't always consistent about how it paces out when these enemies are used. I would go a few songs without seeing a specific monster and then forget how they operate by the time they reappear. I also don't like how the beginner, intermediate, and advanced tutorials are all bundled together right at the start. It was a massive amount of cognitive overload for me starting out. Maybe it's a different story if you intend to play the harder difficulties of the game right away. But a part of the satisfaction of rhythm games for me is building my skills to work up to the harder difficulties. And speaking of the harder difficulties, don't get me started on them. They have some of the most deranged note charting I've ever seen from a rhythm game. The controls also take a lot of time to get used to, if you can believe it, which might sound weird given how simple the game looks. It took a very long time to decide if the keyboard or controller felt better to use. Eventually, I settled on a custom key binding for regular songs, but then controller for the additional game modes. Speaking of the additional game modes, those were actually some of my favorite parts of Rift. These don't happen very frequently, but it's an appreciated break whenever they appear. The boss battles are unfortunately a little simple, as it's not hard to get a perfect score if you follow the prompts. They don't even find a way to make it particularly tricky like with the regular songs. Still, the art is really good, and mechanically they remind me of Punch-Out! And anything that reminds me of Punch-Out! Is pretty cool. The minigames are where the team could flex a lot more of their creativity. I was always excited to see a new minigame because I truly had no idea what to expect from them. It made me wish I could play a whole game based around these modes instead. But I suppose the easiest response to me would be, just go play a Rhythm Heaven game for once, you moron. To be honest, I wouldn't say my time with Rift of the Necrodancer was unenjoyable, nor do I regret playing it. But as I went on to play it for longer, I gradually found myself disliking it more and more. Especially if it had been a while since I last played it, it was hard to just pick up and play to have a good time with. There was a time towards the beginning of the year where I felt a call emerging from the depths of my soul. It asked me to not only play Stardew Valley, but to commit to it, get as far as I possibly could and see what the game had to offer. When my soul tells me it's time to play a particular video game, it's usually right, but I was curious, why this game and why now? I had picked up Stardew Valley around the time of its 1.0 version was released, all the way back in 2016. I did enough to get a sense of what the game was, but not enough to have even finished a full in-game year. I hadn't even scratched the surface of what the game had to offer. But now that I've grown up and even mellowed out a bit, a game where I didn't have to worry about a traditional conflict, and could engage at my own pace just had a lot more appeal. This year I decided to return and start fresh this time. A new character, a new farm, a new mindset. And this time, it became my everything. At its core, Stardew Valley is a farming game. You plant, water, and grow crops to sell to make a living. But it's a game where you can also be a woodcutter, a craftsman, a fisherman, a prospector, a fighter. All of these paths generate revenue in the end, so it's easy to justify jumping between them. Doing each one provides bits of experience that eventually add up and make you more efficient at each of those tasks. And you'll need to master all of these disciplines eventually if you want to reach video game nirvana. But if all you want to do is one of those things, that's completely up to you. And each day cycle is just perfectly paced, where a day doesn't feel too short, where you don't feel like you have enough time to do what you want, without being too long. Maybe you're finished tilling the fields and planting the crops, so tomorrow all you want to do is just go fishing instead, or go to the mines the day after. The game never forces you to do anything you don't want to, but also provides incentives to try out new things, making the choice entirely your own. It's absolutely one of those games where you go, alright, just one more day before I shut my computer down and do something else, and other silly lies you tell yourself. There were entire weekends, 32 waking hours of available free time away from my actual job, and I spent all of them playing Stardew Valley. Over this time, Stardew Valley jumped up to be by far my most played game on Steam ever, taking only a few months to beat out the collective time spent on Borderlands 2 over the last 12 years. For better or worse, most definitely worse, I was addicted to Stardew Valley now. The root of this addiction, I believe, stemmed from goals. The game gives you a ton of milestones to work towards, but by the time you finish one of those milestones, the game gives you a little reward for your hard work and informs you about the next thing you should work towards. And these rewards aren't items, at least not always, but rather changes to the world itself. It feels like Stardew Valley grows alongside the player. The game doesn't stop providing these goals. Even by the time I was 50 hours in, I was still being given new objectives to complete. By the time I unlocked the Walnut Room on Ginger Island, I had realized that I wasn't all that far away from the perfection ending. And that wasn't a problem for me. I was conditioned to accept this final challenge of finishing the rest of the game. So I continued. I farmed, fished, mined, and crafted my way to 100%. And after a few months of progress, almost 6 full in-game years later, here I was standing at the summit. And with that, I had completed the objective that called me to Stardew Valley in the first place. Starlight Legacy is one of those games I found out by happenstance and just decided to give a shot. For a game that was basically entirely made by one person, I think it turned out pretty well, but not very noteworthy. To be honest, it's fine, but painfully generic. The game's primary hook is that it's an open-world JRPG experience, where the dungeons can be tackled in any order. This is true by technicality. The game is segmented off between 6 key areas: the starting zone, the central hub kingdom, and the 4 elemental kingdoms that branch off from it. But you can only visit one area at a time, and these places are the Grassland, Desert Land, Snowland, and Mountain Land. Nothing that truly captures your imagination. Also, because the enemies scale and level alongside your progress in the main story, there's not many advantages to tackling the game in a different order from someone else. The battle system of the game is also pretty standard, nothing to write home about. The game has a menuing system that is closer to something like Super Mario RPG, with each of its face buttons corresponding with a different command type. That being said, what I think helps Super Mario RPG and even Persona is the animation flourishes that communicate the battle flow. The menu in Starlight Legacy just statically changes between the different options after a button is pressed. I often lost track of which character's turn it was, or if I pressed the right button. You have the option to change it into a regular menu if that's more helpful, but I think the limited options you have makes the traditional menu a bit frustrating to work with, weirdly enough. The core of the battling is the game's magic and skill system. All 3 of your party members are a mage. They can also wield any of the equipment you find, which rather than linearly increasing stats, will raise some and lower others. With that in mind, there are decisions you need to make for who to teach your spells to, and which equipment will best facilitate the roles you want everyone to have in combat. But the game is in an awkward place where it's just challenging enough to be engaging, but not challenging enough to force you to learn its mechanical depth, which there also isn't a whole lot of to begin with. Sure, you can make use of buff spells and the like, but once you figure out the enemy's weakness, the best strategy is to just spam that spell over and over until they die. Getting farther into the game just dumps a lot of the same enemies on you in larger quantities with higher stats, and that's more annoying than fun. The overworld is also inspired by some seminal classics. It even has the familiar ledges and obstacles that can be traversed with new equipment. As you progress further into one of the game's kingdoms, you'll unlock a new tool which will help you progress in the overworld. Functionally just like HMs, which is pretty cool. It makes the traversal feel fun to do. I feel like games don't take inspiration from Pokemon in these ways unless it's specifically derived from Pokemon. But I think they should. Having things to interact with in the overworld makes a massive difference. While the game is at times a little too generic, its heart is in the right place, and it's still fun to play. And with a short runtime of about 10 hours, it's a surprisingly compact RPG experience we don't get too often these days. That being said, if you're craving something simpler, or even generic, then Starlight Legacy might very well be appealing for you. Ah, The Legend of Zelda. They don't make games like this anymore. I mean, actually though, they don't make games like this anymore. With the release of Breath of the Wild, the Zelda series has completely pivoted in terms of overall game direction. And for right now, it seems like they don't have a lot of interest in returning to the olden Zelda formula. A decision which almost every gamer in the world has opinions about. But regardless of how I feel about that decision, I'm not really bothered by Nintendo's choice to pursue a new direction with Zelda. Because plenty of developers out there clearly miss the kind of game Zelda used to be like, and want to provide that experience. The Girl from Arkanya is basically a Zelda game in all but title, specifically the Minish Cap. It features a lot of the core appeals players have been familiar with since games like A Link to the Past. There's an overworld to explore, optional caves to dwell inside, and required multi-floor dungeons to puzzle around in. The dungeons will eventually provide items and abilities which help you to further explore the world to find new secrets. The game also has a big emphasis on treasure hunting, which helps to better align players with Marista's character trait of wanting to be the world's greatest treasure hunter. This leads very naturally in having a big world with many optional branches and caves, perfect for the curious explorer to traverse. The game can even be a co-op adventure if you want it to be, which if nothing else would probably make the puzzles that require both characters a lot less cumbersome. Character swapping, while functional, doesn't come off as particularly intuitive to do. There's also just not a lot of reasons to switch to Cappy. Although he gets new upgrades over the journey, for the most part, Marissa gets those same upgrades. Mayhaps he should have gotten a few exclusive powers to make it feel like switching between the two was more important. I don't know. It's weird. Game's weird. But I'm also weird, so I'm gonna forgive it. All this to say that if you feel like you're missing the specific kind of adventure game you grew up with, The Girl from Arkanya is probably just for you. It's admittedly nothing you haven't seen before, but I'm excited to see how Arkanya Games is going to evolve their design chops and go on to create even better projects. And if they are fully able to realize their potential, I don't think I'm going to miss the old Zelda games that much. Turret Girls is exactly what it looks like on the surface. This is an on-rails shooter tower defense game. Assist the planetary alien neutralization tactical strike unit in fighting against a mysterious extraterrestrial force. You take control of Girl, apparently that is canonically her name, and with her in the seat, you get behind one of the turrets defending this military base, so you can get a great view of the action. Okay, I know. The camera is conveniently placed. But I'm playing this for the gameplay. Not only do you need to aim your turrets at the various oncoming enemies, you also need to keep Girl moving. Not only to get yourself into better positions, but to also evade enemy attacks. While the primary objective is to defend your power generators at the foot of the base, some enemies will specifically target Girl, and if she's attacked too much, she'll take damage and... Oh my god, guys, no, I swear this is not a Gooner game. It's not a Gooner game, damn it, okay, it's a Gooner game. It's absolutely a Gooner game. Although I am serious, the combat system is really fun and engaging, despite the thematic presentation. Turret Girls is a kind of game which I don't often populate my library with. A game I can just sit down and play. No need for a story, no need to put in that much brainpower, which provides this with a specific niche for me. It's not the most unique type of game in the world, but it's a nice evolution of the run-based ability selection format that finds a way to feel fresh. It's not an overly big game. Its scope is actually refreshingly small. It's appropriately sized and deep enough to continually come back to. It's definitely going to be one of those games I pick up every so often just if I need to play something for 20 minutes. With the door to my room firmly closed. Xenoblade is a series I'm known to be an enjoyer of, and Xenoblade Chronicles X for the Wii U is a game held in a very special place in my heart. While it wasn't the first Xeno game I played, it was more or less responsible for getting me interested in the series. The build-up to its release inspired me to finally go back and pick up Xenoblade Chronicles for the Wii, and I loved it. And it was absolutely the correct decision to start there. Xenoblade X turned out to be a weirdo game that was very tonally, mechanically, and structurally different from what I was used to. It's hard not to appreciate how ambitious Xenoblade X is, and for what it's worth, I would never claim it was an unenjoyable time. In fact, I was very addicted to it at first, sinking in about 100 hours into the game after my first week of playing it. Like, actually, I'm serious, it was really about that much time in the span of a week. But by the end of my initial playthrough, I concluded it to be a disappointing follow-up to Xenoblade 1. It didn't capture the things that made Xenoblade 1 such an engaging adventure. Although now that we live in a post-Xenoblade 2 and Xenoblade 3 world, I became much more receptive to the type of game Xenoblade X is. And after picking up the definitive edition, I immediately felt that renewed sense of appreciation. The memories of how addicted I was to the game in 2015 came rushing back to me. Your primary goal in Xenoblade X is to explore this new world, gather resources, battle tough monsters, and complete various quests. The game is suited for people who just kinda want to do everything an open world has to offer. If you are a spreadsheet freak, if you are a checklist fiend, then Xenoblade Chronicles X just might be the game for you. X is famous for how massive its world is, and despite its size, it feels like there's something worthwhile to fill that entire space. Whether that be the small collectibles pulling you along the world, or the massive behemoths of monsters that make you feel insignificant comparatively. Not to mention scaling up giant rock faces with some crazy moon jumps to be greeted with a sight that makes you feel like you're on top of the world. You can definitely feel where Monolith Soft's open world experience helped shape Breath of the Wild to be the game that it turned out to be. The form factor of the Switch also massively benefits the structure of Xenoblade X as a game. In fact, all the way back when the Switch was first announced, I was hoping the entire time that Xenoblade X would be ported to the console. In order to progress further into the main story, one of the prerequisites is to raise your game's completion percentage. An annoying gate if you want to progress into the main story as soon as possible, but a slightly less annoying excuse to play for a few minutes each night in bed before going to sleep. Or at least that would be the idea, if my launch day Switch could still hold a decent battery charge. But after about 15 hours with the game, I got pretty bored. The gameplay systems wore down on me after this point. Having up to 20 different party members and needing to manage their equipment and arts for them, bringing them all into battle to get their affinity up so you can eventually do their side missions. At the end of the day, there's so many variables to factor into the battle system, and the mental fatigue of needing to manage it all became too much for me. And I didn't want to go through the effort to figure it out again because the story by itself wasn't interesting enough to compel me. I don't really have the screenwriting vocabulary to really describe why, but if you were to just compare even the two Xenoblade games at the original release, there was a wealth of organic world building, character development, and narrative setup happening from Xenoblade 1, which isn't being handled a fraction as well in Xenoblade X. After 2 hours of Xenoblade 1, you're ready to set out and kick Metalface's ass, if not already nearing the Bionis leg. After 2 hours of Xenoblade X, you can finally start to feel like you're getting to play the game for yourself. This game is dramatically boring in the literal sense, but that's also just another reason why this is such a weirdo game. Xenoblade X isn't really about the story, and yet it loves to tell a story. Cutscenes get dragged on, jokes get played out, and your playable avatar of the game has basically no agency in the plot. It feels really hard to get invested in what the antagonists are plotting or what the protagonists are doing because the story's forward momentum is dictated by unrelated progression gates. None of this is helped by the fact that the new epilogue content, which patches up the big cliffhanger of the original Wii U ending, is only accessible by completing the main story from scratch. And I get that because it's an immediate follow-up to the base story in the exact same setting, it's logistically more difficult to separate, unlike Future Connected. But as someone who played the original game and didn't even remember it all that well, this story isn't particularly rewarding to re-experience. Even when getting to that new epilogue, the pacing issues that the game already suffered from become extremely worse. But when I kick back and approach this game as I would something like an MMO, I found the fun in it again. Doing just a few side missions before bed, an affinity mission here and there, just finding a few points of interest on my Frontier Nav map and doing them. That was what I ended up enjoying most about the game. Just role-playing as a guild member. Going around doing missions. That was all I really needed. So yeah, if the big reason you love the Xenoblade series is the profound character-driven stories, this won't be your jam. But if you want a different take on the battle system of the Xenoblade series, or you just really want to mess around in an open world, then Planet Mira is waiting for you. The 100-line Last Defense Academy is my game of the year. When I look back on 2025 in the future, this is going to be the game I will forever associate with that year. Mostly in the sense that this game literally took me the whole year to finish. Remember how Stardew Valley became my most played game on Steam? Oops. I really did not comprehend the commitment I was signing up for when I started this game. I had passively heard that it was a long game with multiple branching routes, but I could not possibly imagine just how long it was and just how far out those many routes branched. When I started this game, I assumed I'd just jump in, make the decisions I'd naturally make, and see whatever ending that resulted in. And that was going to be my ending to the narrative, even if that was the milk carton ending. But unfortunately for me, I ended up making the worst decisions possible. I went into the route that has a story lock requiring multiple routes to be completed before access is granted. It was then that my view of the 100 Lines narrative was unknowingly poisoned. This isn't a title where each of the game's 100 endings are a natural endpoint for how the story could have been told, but rather a complex puzzle where the more routes you complete, the more information you'll have to construct the solution that is a true 100th ending and fully conclude the story. And let me just say now that turned out to be very wrong. There is a true ending, but it's just the singular ending of the game's intended scenario, with every branch being a what-if that plays off the story at those moments of decision. And in a slightly different timeline, where I made decisions closer to the true path, I might have gotten the coming-of-age ending instead and stopped the game there. I probably wouldn't have been compelled to view everything the game had to offer. My understanding of the game was guided to an incorrect interpretation of its overall intention at a point where my perception was the most formative. But that narrative hook was so intriguing that I needed to see it through. And the following routes of the game I did accidentally reinforce the idea that each of the game's branching scenarios are all connected and happening in parallel with each other, and that I absolutely needed to complete the entire thing to understand what the game was truly about. And I won't lie, it drove me insane, because, this is a 200-hour game if you do everything. Even after completing my 15th route of the game, I still felt like the end was nowhere in sight. My mind began to wonder about how long I've been in this place. When I initially started the story of Last Defense Academy, I became intrigued by the mystery it put in front of me. But by the end of the game, I found a completely different meaning in the story, which I think was intended, but maybe not exactly in the way I've manifested. The story I experienced with the narrative whole of the 100 Lines slowly turned into what it's like to be a soldier. I don't want to pretend that I actually understand what fighting for my life is like, nor being a civilian having to navigate a war-torn landscape. To imply that a game gave me that experience would be at least somewhat irresponsible. But the 100 Lines still got me to consider the dreariness and shock of how it might feel. Where we're asked to rise to the call of duty, expecting to find the glory of being a war hero, propagandized and continually reinforced about the barbaric enemy on the other side. but we end up seeing the same kinds of scenarios play out over and over again. And things don't get better, they get worse. We begin making choices we previously would have never considered. It eventually turns us into monsters. You have to wonder if this entire war was even worth it. Whatever happened to only being here for 100 days? All the time you spent, all the battles you fought. Did the 2,200 days, the last 6 years, really mean anything in the end? No one enlists in a war understanding the gravity of what they just signed up for, let alone for conscripted child soldiers, forcibly shoved into this fight. There is no easy off-ramp. There is no main story finished after 60 hours in war. It slowly eats away at your mind as you realize the people you're fighting against are also just people like yourself. The conflict is started and perpetuated by elites who are so far removed from the fighting in the first place that it doesn't even really matter what happens to the people on the ground floor. And don't look at me, so smug like that. After all, what were you doing in this? You weren't Takumi Sumino. You weren't the one risking life and limb in every defensive battle. When the outcome of the war wasn't good enough, you told him to go back and do it again. The Special Defense Unit has to keep fighting. It's their duty to keep fighting. They must fight until the best outcome is finally achieved. That's when the reward will be bestowed. That's when the war will be over. That's when we can finally get closure and return to our normal lives. If only it was that simple. Because when I finally got to ending 100, even though the ending was by all metrics the best outcome, my mind only festered in a sense of apathy. The thing my mind kept repeating for the rest of the night was, this wasn't worth it. None of the time I spent here was worth it. This war wasn't worth it. Anyway, the 100-line Last Defense Academy is my game of the year, and maybe even one of my favorite games of all time now. I don't recommend it.